Welcome to Real Sales, episode 1. This is a podcast done by real sales professionals to talk about real strategies that we use today. Today is going to be a unique show. One, we're going to bring a guy out of the cave that's really never came onto this kind of platform before. Richard Daigle from FreightWaves. How you doing, my man?
Hey, good morning. Pleasure to be here, and excited about this. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Richie, let's just give a little bit of background of, how you got to FreightWaves, and then we'll kind of go into why today is going to be extremely important. And I think a lot of people are going to find value out of this.
Yeah, that's great. I used to be in the adventure travel space. I was a sales manager and for a couple of different companies, adventure travel companies. And prior to the pandemic hitting, I have to say that an opportunity came up at FreightWaves, and it just seemed too good to pass up. I've had a background in statistics when I was in school, and was always kind of drawn to statistics and data, and using that information to get to the reality of whatever's happening. So that kind of pulled me in, and I went to an event over at Freight Alley and had some conversations, and next thing you know, here I am. Made a big change. So it looks like in hindsight, it kind of worked out in my favor because, travel was not a good place to be in for 2020. I certainly have a lot of former colleagues and friends that are in tight spots at the moment, but hopeful that industry will bounce back in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, really. I mean, we get so focused on what we're doing in front of us that I forgot that you were in that travel space, and if you wouldn't have made the decisions that you made, it would have definitely been a tight situation to be in.
Definitely. And I'm purely lucky there, right? I mean, it was a decision that was made, but I mean, yeah, in hindsight, it's like, wow, things could have been so different. But nevertheless, here we are, and excited to be here, and a lot of momentum happening or gaining here at FreightWaves with Sonar, and that's really exciting to be a part of.
Perfect. No, awesome. And so today we're really going to focus on discovery and introduction from the enterprise perspective. This podcast is going to be really focused towards enterprise strategies. One thing that I've always found with podcasts that I've listened to and things that I've seen on LinkedIn and such has always been like, okay, like create a schedule. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. Like I've read that a million times, or, these basics of, being successful as a salesperson is like, okay, well, you got to make sure you're doing your prospecting. Like, all right. Yeah, we got that. Let's get deep into some granularities of areas that can really push the needle of whether or not you're selling, a couple $1,000 subscription to selling $500,000 subscription. And, that's the reason why I think today is going to be extremely impactful. Not only, Richie, were you the top salesman at FreightWaves for Sonar last year, but you amongst other people have a really unique perspective, being that you always seem like you really care. And I think that's probably a good starting point, is that, from my background being, I worked as a freight broker. I sold TMS to brokerages, but that was probably something that I didn't really, which was, I guess you would call it empathy. Didn't really learn that till I got here to FreightWaves and almost started collaborating with you in a sense that, so let's just start off with that question. You're coming into, let's just call it an inbound lead, and it's a Fortune 500 shipper or a large company, let's just say. And so how do you keep, your emotions at bay, being that the potential of this being extremely high dollar payout versus I really want to understand the value that this can really drive with this organization before jumping into, the meats and potatoes of our technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's a difficult thing for us salespeople, myself included. We want to have success. We want to make money. We want to achieve things. We have great ambitions. There's reasons why People like us get pulled into sales. We're hungry and we're driven, and we'll bend over backwards to get things done. But I think it's a slippery slope sometimes to let your focus be wholly on yourself and your own strategy and your own goals and your own product and your own whatever it is that you have to offer. Everything is me, me, me. And I think that can certainly do you some well, or do you some good over time, but it's gonna limit what you're capable of, right? And because at the end of the day, if you're selling something, um, why are you selling it? What good is it doing? What's the purpose for the product that you have? I mean, these are really important questions to ask yourself, because are you only selling something to make money only and that's it? Or is there something else that you can provide that is literally going to enact like some sort of change to an industry, or provide some sort of real concrete legitimate value to that client? And if you're change your focus to be more other centric and to be on the prospect themselves, and to really be present in every moment of communication that you're having with them, so that you're listening to what their needs are and you are genuinely interested and generally empathetic in hearing their story and understanding their story inside and out, then you're going to be better equipped for how you can deliver a product that is going to meet their needs and exceed their expectations. You're going to be better equipped for setting correct expectations and setting them in a way where you can, exceed them, which is a situation that every salesperson wants to be in. So I think about, chess sometimes. I play chess from time to time, and I'm going through one of these master classes with
Specific
Gary
to
Kasparov.
chess?
Yeah, specific to chess.
Oh
So
my
it's
God, you are a
and
geek bird. That's
I'm
for
a
sure.
nerd. I know it's terrible. But he talks about the difference between like good players and great players. And good players focus on their own strategies. They focus on their own openings, and they memorize all these moves. They focus on the middle game strategies and tactics, and they focus on end games, and all of their focus is on their own stuff. But those players eventually get themselves in trouble because they're not paying attention to what their opponent's doing on the other side of the board. And the grandmasters will immediately turn all their focus on what their opponent's doing, and then apply the correct strategies and openings in middle game and end game according
Mm.
to what their opponent's doing. I think that's and not viewing prospects as opponents, but I think that there's something to take away there for sales, in that when the focus is on the prospect more so than yourself, when you buy into the idea that the prospect is the hero of the story and not yourself, you open up an environment where you're able to be more present, you're able to take in more information, you're able to understand that story, and then you're able to sell to that in a way that benefits both them, and then you get some benefit as well, obviously, because you're going to be making sales and whatnot. So it's more
It
about
almost sounds
uncovering
like
what exists.
it's like having like a defensive approach. I hate to call it defensive because I think that gets a bad rep sometimes, where all you're doing is like managing questions, and you're getting attacked, and you're trying to just try to put strategies in place so that you don't die, I guess, per se. But is that how you would describe it? It's kind of more of a defensive approach, whereas when you're on the offense and you're just thinking about, well, if I do this, this, and this, it's going to get me to that, instead of, well, if they go this way, this is what I'm going to do. If they go that way, this is what I'm going to do. And just being a very nimble style of question
Yeah,
asker or just discovery.
and just like what you said with being offense, like I'm going to do this, this, and this. Well, why? What assumptions are you basing that thought process on? Because there are going to be assumptions. You might look at a big company, and you're like, wow, this company's massive. They have all kinds of money. Their annual revenues through the roof.
They
They're
must be
huge.
geniuses.
Right. And they also probably have a whole lot of money to give to me. And I'm going to go have this massive sale with them. But there's a number of assumptions that you're making to get to that point.
Mm.
And you have to, like, when you are asking those preliminary questions, right, and wanting to understand their story and wanting to qualify that person, you are essentially doing away with those assumptions. You're either confirming them or you're unearthing that they're incorrect. And so by getting away with all the assumptions, you start uncovering what reality really is. They might be a big company, but your product might not have a big impact. And so now if you overprice, you're not going to have an ROI, and it's going to be a non-starter. They're going to walk away, right? So you have to understand who are they? What are they doing? What is their story, and how is your product going to drive real value? And then you start unearthing what is, and now you can form a deal according to the reality of the situation and the reality of the impact of your product and the return on investment it can provide. And you're not trying to force something that's just based on assumptions. So I think, like, to your point, like, if you're too aggressive, then you might be taking too many assumptions into the conversation, and that can get you in trouble. You're not in a position to listen. So I think by listening and really genuinely listening, right? Like, not just waiting for the person to stop talking so you can get your word in because you have something that you're just itching to spit out, but being in the moment and having an awareness about yourself to where you can take in all the information that they're providing.
Right.
Yeah,
How do you
I don't
keep
know if that helps.
yourself kind of, your emotions at bay in those situations? Because I mean, that's really, it's like with anything, the concept is really easy. The application is hard. And so I find myself a lot of times getting extremely excited. I can feel myself moving around in my seat a little bit when I start hearing certain buzzwords. I feel my heart rate start going up. I just start feeling, and I really get excited about it. How do you keep, that wolf down? And because once you start thinking about it, and to your point, try to actually listen, when I start hearing those buzzwords, and it's like, for us, it's like, oh, we're looking to automate. We're data driven. And I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Keep going, keep going. You're saying all the words I love. But then my listening turns off once I start getting that kind of anxiety, I guess you can call it, or excitedness. How do you keep that down to keep your listening focused throughout the conversation?
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a good strategy other than just practice, and then keeping in mind that people want to be heard, they want to be listened to. And if I cut somebody off and jump in because I'm so excited that I heard something beneficial, they might miss everything that I have to say. And the thing that sticks out to them is, that dude just cut me off. I had more to say. I had more to add on to that. And
Right.
it's the feeling, right? It's the situation where nobody wants to be cut off. Nobody wants to be talked over. Nobody wants to be hard sold or pressure sold, or like, nobody. There's a reason why people use used car salesmen as bad examples, right? You don't
Right.
want that feeling. And so if you give somebody that feeling, that's not, it's not helping anything.
Right.
So, and it's difficult, right? Because you have more information than they do about your product, and you might be able to see, oh man, I'm gonna be able to help these people out so much, and this product is going to drive a lot of value. But you have to let them talk. You have to give them their space, and you have to hear them, and they might drop more, nuggets of information that are really helpful towards the tail end of whatever they're saying. And then now you've given them that space to say everything that they need to say. Okay, now, hey, I hear you, I understand you, I know where you're at. Here's a product that can help you. Here's how we can drive value for your organization. Here's what we can do for you. And now, because you've listened to them wholly, you're creating an environment where they're more likely to listen to you wholly as well.
Do you do anything to kind of reconfirm that the other party has been heard? Or like, do you have any tactics? I hate tactics are bad, but like, do you have like, there's this mirroring kind of effect where you start, maybe repeating some of the top words maybe that you just heard from the person, but do you take anything like that into your strategy?
I've read some of those things. My problem with them, I think they work for a lot of people, like repeating and some of these clues. My problem with it is when I start doing these types of tactics, I don't feel as genuine. And I don't feel as authentic. I feel like I'm forcing something mechanical.
Almost like you're
And
scripted.
for me, it's hard. That's why I never did well with scripted sales approaches either. Like previous sales jobs was like, hey, read this script. It works this percent of the time. We just need you to be the human person that reads words. And I'm like, that's not me. I need to be me. So yeah, I try to just stick to that. And sometimes I have bad days, right? And I might get insecure and overly talkative in a sales approach where I'm not allowing enough space for the other person to talk. And I have good days where I feel like I'm in the zone and I'm hearing people and they're hearing me and we're making great progress. We're building momentum. We're closing deals. But I think over time, the commitment to authenticity and being authentic and being genuine, good or bad, is important. It's a value to me. And I use that word with a lot of weight, value. I heard the Canlis brothers, who own a nice restaurant up in Seattle, they once said, values are only values if they cost you something. And if your values don't cost you something, they're not your values, and you should go figure out what your values are. And so, being authentic is a value, and that costs me sometimes. Like maybe it's not as effective. I have bad days, etc. And maybe I'd be able to avoid that by using some of these scripts or some of these like tactics and stuff. But in the long run, I think it's worth it.
Right. When you're talking about scalability and, taking, the Richie Daigles and scaling that to how do we have 5 Richie Daigles? I'm sure, our president's thought about that a million times. I'm sure our managers have thought of that. And even before we started last year, it was, how do we scale the Brad Gananes? How do we make 5 of those? And so when you take that the authentic approach, sometimes I guess devil's advocate would be you lose the ability to scale because
Yeah,
everyone's different.
it's an evolution though, right? Because you know, to your point, like that, some of those tactics, right? That's an end result. That's further down the road. I think if you grow people and develop people at the core of who they are, like further upstream, getting to the root of them as a person, then all these things take care of themselves naturally and organically. I would say you want to start developing people, or you want to be the type of salesperson that the prospect on the other end of the line would gladly jump in the car with you for a cross country road trip, right? Like that's the type of warmth and authenticity and genuineness that you want to have with that other person. You want to be somebody that's pleasant to talk with, because then you can start forming trust. Now, what that looks like for me could be completely different than what it looks like for Kyle Taylor, or it might be completely different for anybody else. But that's human, right? Like when we start trying to scale sales teams in a way where everybody is cookie cuttered into the same way, you're taking away their humanness and their authenticity to some degree. Whereas I think if you start looking at what types of people, or what are those common threads for successful people, and then trying to elicit those behaviors out of people in a natural and authentic way, that I think is more impactful, because now you're empowering people to be the better versions of themselves, as opposed to trying to get people to fit into a box that you've decided is probably based on some assumptions the best box for scaling sales teams.
Right. And
Yeah.
depending on the products you've sold and the biases you may have, I mean, for example, me going from a brokerage to a TMS to a data company, you would think that, the sales process would be somewhat similar, talking to large companies at each stage. But when I was coming into the brokerage, the script was the script. I completely agree with you on that, where I felt like I this is what I did. Hey, this is Kyle Taylor at brokerage. Can I speak to your transportation manager? And but for brokerages who are maybe looking at more transactional business, which is tough to do this kind of authenticity, is that they're hiring 100 people hoping that like 10 fit. And when there's that kind of approach and that mentality at a company, you lose that that urge to want to be successful because you feel like you can't be yourself. And ultimately that's why I end up leaving. But from previous jobs, so like I've been so focused on transportation my entire career, you having an outside source and almost having to bootstrap transportation knowledge in a year, what did you take from previous jobs that end up being extremely successful in a transportation driven type of company?
Yeah, in travel, it's all about the experience, right? So when you're selling travel, you want to sell an experience, you want to sell a story, you want to sell a feeling. And then you need to be able to deliver on that, right? Because people are spending lots of money and very precious vacation time on your specific trip. And so you need to be able to convince them that your trip is worth it and worth the money and the time. And then you need to be able to exceed those expectations. And so it's a big ask, from a sales and service standpoint. But in terms of selling, the story and the experience is everything. And so taking that into transportation, again, through that qualification process and getting to know a client, you want to uncover what their story is, right? It's not going to be as glamorous or as sexy as travel, most likely, but they still have a story. They still have what their day is consisting of, and a lot of different things like that, right? They have a story, a through thread that's happening throughout the course of the year, and you can understand that, and then you can start applying your solutions in the applicable way or in the best possible way to match and fit into that story. And I think it's easier for people to understand solutions when they are applied or put into the parameters of their own story. It just gives a framework where it's easier for them to ingest and understand the power of what you're providing.
So how do you elicit that story? I mean, best case scenarios, you hope people are just like almost like you're talking to another sales rep. The easy that quote of like the easiest person to sell is usually someone who's been in sales because they just have empathy for the person that's doing the selling. But for people that are tight-lipped, I mean, we've all seen 5 to 50 different situations of people. But how do you get them to trust you to open up and tell you that story on a first call where we've just met each other 10 minutes ago?
Yeah, sometimes you need an NDA, right? Like so you're just not gonna talk. But you can ask questions, and I've been in so many initial calls and asked some questions. They're like, "Listen, buddy, we don't have an NDA yet." And I'm like, "All right, maybe we need to get one."
Right.
But I think it starts with homework, right? So before you even jump into the first call, do your homework. Who is this company? What's going on with them? Are they in the news? What can you find out on the internet? Right? So you can get an idea of how they're set up. You can get an idea of a lot of things just from doing some preliminary homework. Now, when you go into that first call, you can kind of show that, like, hey, I saw or I read over here that you all are doing XYZ. That's really cool. Can you tell me more about that? Or tell me about your background, right? Show interest in them as an individual, and then try to understand, try to show and be authentic that you are wanting to better understand what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve, what their day looks like, what problems they're facing. If they contacted you as an inbound lead, why? And if not, what do they know about your product and what it has to offer? And so there's a lot of good questions, but you want to have them all directed towards them first. And you want to position and structure the cadence of those questions and the order and the types of questions in a way that shows you're really authentically interested in what they are doing as a company and as an individual. And I think that kind of lays the groundwork of trust, and hopefully you would build from there.
Yeah, and that research piece, I mean, everyone always talks about it. I mean, we kind of joked about this previously to starting this, but sales tactics of, starting your own schedule, doing research, doing your cold outreach, like all these things that everyone always talks about, that piece, I think you're limited to I think there is a limitation to the amount of questions you can ask an individual before they just start wanting something, because they're giving and they're going to want something, especially if it is an inbound, like, hey, I reached out to you because I want to learn about you. Now I understand you need to ask me some questions to position a solution, understand that. Now, I think that's where the research piece can really be beneficial, is that I've done both. I've gone on the call and been like, okay, well, what's your title? I could have easily done that on LinkedIn. Like that was a stupid question and a waste of a question that I could have easily already had, or even down to transportation specific. Where are your DC locations? How many DCs do you have? Like what, there are some, unknowns there that you need to ask some things like that, but there's definitely a ton of research that you can do in the front end.
Yeah, and well, here I am cutting you off and proving myself right.
It is.
All I was going to say is, what are your motivations for those things? What are your motivations for research? What are your motivations for the questions you're asking?
Right.
Are you focused on yourself and just wanting to pull enough information that you feel like you can achieve your own agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you trying to uncover who that other person really is and what reality is and how the reality of the situation is going to play out? I've for what we sell, there's situations, not many, but there's some situations where somebody says that all they're doing is specialty heavy haul open deck types of moves, and I don't have anything to help them, or what I have is very limited, and I've uncovered that, right? But now I can still form that relationship and be straightforward and honest with that.
Mm-hmm.
We can continue a conversation that may still lead to a good place, but it's all about being honest and transparent, and you have to listen to people in order to do that effectively.
Right. Or you get into, halfway through a discovery call and the guy's like, oh, I only do open deck.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I just pitched like 4 solutions that are specific towards dry van. That's interesting.
Yeah, now that guy is frustrated because he feels like his time's being wasted, right? And he might be best friends with a guy that owns a 1,000 truck dry van company right down the road, right? And so if you ruin those opportunities for potential, referrals, or what bad's coming from a good relationship, and
Right.
granted, these are business relationships. I'm not trying to invite people over to my house for barbecues, but we're human, and this is what we do, and the way how you do or how you achieve whatever goals that you have in mind, I think, is more important than whether you actually go up and get there to achieve them or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how I choose to go about things.
Right. No, that's definitely, something that I've had to do some adjustments to. And one thing that you said, the beginning of that, was the motivation. What is your motivation in order to ask these questions or to do the research? From the transportation focus, we run into things all the time where it is so money driven, it is so profit driven, especially when we're looking at brokerages, and carriers, where the reason why you're coming in, the reason why you're making that phone call, and it's how I've been trained even early on, is one extra phone call can be an extra $50 in margin. An extra 30 minutes of cold calls can get you another customer that's going to give you, X amount of business. And, I think that's where I had to like reprogram my mind, because I was so hyper focused on that and like already doing the math of my commission, and that we're not even close to closing a deal. It's like, it was so money focused and so me centric that I was confused why my close rate was low. All of a sudden my customer would come back and tell me, hey, we end up going with someone else. And I'm like trying to think back the entire way of like, well, what happened along the way, where it wasn't an individual act. It was like just the entire mindset throughout the whole process. And that's something that I struggle with. And I know, being new into this, and this is another focus that I won't go on another tangent, for people that have that mentality. And that was something that I really want this this kind of platform to do, is to give people who are like, oh, all right, well, I want to do enterprise. I want, I want to I want to drive a Range Rover. I want to make bank, bro. And but it's not as simple as just like, okay, I get to talk to John Deere. It's not that simple. So like, what maybe books have you read or different things that maybe have helped you gear towards that enterprise? Is it really just the customer centricness of your previous jobs, or how
Yeah,
would you help someone getting into this space?
there's a lot of great books. There's so much good information out there, and there's a lot of people who are thinking about things correctly. And then there's a lot of people that are wanting to sell books because they're really only wanting to pad their pockets. I get real critical of people that brag about how much money they've made in all of their books, because I'm like, if you made all this money, then why are you so dependent on selling all these books? Right? It seems like you're really just making your money off of suckers like me, so to speak. I try to look at what an author has done and who they are, and be mindful about the types of people that I want to engage with and read. um, there's something interesting that you said about everybody wanting the Range Rover and wanting to make all the money. Um, Back in the 60s, 70s, there's a famous Viennese psychologist, Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor. Great little 2-minute TED talk if you ever want to feel inspired. But he said, 16% of college students, when surveyed upon graduation, said that their maximum goal in life was to make a lot of money. 16%. Money is fuel, and it fuels you to be able to do a lot of things that probably are more meaningful to you than money, like taking care of your kids, and being able to take care of your family, and being able to go experience things, and whatever it may be, right? But I think it's important to understand that money is fuel. For a business, money is fuel. It's not the end all. The company's got to have, like Simon Sinek says, a just cause, or some reason for existing, some way that it is providing a value or service that is benefiting the world and benefiting an industry or a person, or providing something that is worthy. And I think it's important to understand what that is, and understand, it might be simple, like a carrier. Hey, we're moving loads. Well, you're moving stuff that needs to be moved. Like, that is a necessary service that keeps our economy going. There is something there that is worth understanding the value of. And I think it's important to understand what that meaning is internally and personally as well. So yeah, I like Adam Grant, Simon Sinek. I read a lot of, getting into philosophy and chess strategy. I'm kind of all over the place in my reading, but at the end of the day, I think it's important to understand, what is it that's driving you as a salesperson, and why, and what are your values, and what are your core um, beliefs, if you will, and how does that impact who you are as a salesperson?
Yeah, no, that's definitely impactful. And one thing that I got asked early on, and this was at a conference I was at when I was back at selling TMS, was they called it like the 3 whys. And so, whatever you're doing, ask yourself why 3 times. Eventually you'll get to the ultimate bottom motivation that you're really doing this for. It's like, I want to make a ton of money. Why? Well, I want to have the big cars. Well, why? Well, because I want to show my neighborhood that I'm making money. Well, why?
Yeah.
Well, because I never had it as a kid, and it's something that I always dreamed of being. Okay, now we're getting kind of somewhere to that underlying psychology, or the unconscious bias that we all have deep beneath us. And so I think that's something that I've always tried to use to my advantage whenever I do get like, oh my God, look at, it's commission day. Look at that. Wow. Like, all right, well, what can I do with this? To your point of the fuel, like, I mean, you're a new dad, so you have maybe a different mindset now than maybe you did a year ago, or maybe you're really unique and you've always maybe had this mindset. But that's where I focus, is like, what investment can this go to? How can this better me to double this? How can I, maybe, do something differently so that I don't have to work as much in order to do the same thing?
That's great, and I think that, like if you don't know questions to those or answers to those questions, it's a worthwhile pursuit to figure out what those answers are. Like
Mhm.
Simon Sinek's book, Find Your Why is a good place to start for that as well. But yeah, it gets into, I had a thought and it escaped me. This happens from time to time, but I felt like I had somewhere I was going to go. Um,
I'll take you down a different path. You
yeah.
just brought up Simon Sinek. Start with Why is a great book. When you're going into discovery calls or introduction calls with other people, you're doing your due diligence, you're asking your question, you're building kind of a case. You're asking these questions for a reason to frame what you're about to say in a way that will make the most impact. How do you migrate between, he talks about start with why, but also the what? How do you balance between what your company does and why it does it, and then how do you portray that in a way so that it's not just talking about functions and different aspects of like, oh, this is the date, look at this click that I have, look at this different widget I have.
Going back to like the thought of a car or like buying a car, or selling a car. When you go to look at Aston Martin or a Mustang or some big, nice, powerful car, the last thing that salesperson is going to do is, "Hi, my name's Kyle Taylor. Let me tell you about this engine." Right? No one cares. Like, I want to know that when I get in this car, I'm comfortable, it looks cool, and most importantly, when I put this thing in first gear and push the gas pedal down, it's going to throw my head in the back of the seat, and I'm going to have this exhilarating experience of taking off, right? It's the experience first. It's the emotion of it first. And I think that understanding what a person's story is can say, okay, here is the way that we can benefit or empower you in your story, and here's what it's going to feel like to push the gas pedal of this product, and letting them, like, getting that in first, engaging them there. Oh man, that would be incredible if I was able to know what trucking rates are going to be like in 3 months. That, man, what would you do with that? Like, tell me more about the experience that would give you. Like, get them in that headspace first. Then once they're there, I think that sounds great, but okay, you need to prove it to me. Well, now we can get into the nuts and bolts of why you should trust the how of what it is, right? And then the
Yeah.
what, everything else that comes along with it is kind of last. Um, but I think that way of selling is more authentic, or it's just more effective, because I think the tempting thing is just to rush in and vomit, you know,
What
features
you
all
do.
over people. Yeah, like, oh, look at all this stuff that it does, and people are like, whoa, you don't even know me. And I've done that before. I've gotten to the end, and you always know when you've done that at the end of a call, and you say, well, you're trying to get some feedback, you're trying to feel people out, and they're basically like, we'll get in touch with you, don't get in touch with us. If we're interested in pursuing this, we'll get back to you. This seems great, but man, there sure is a lot here, and we're not quite sure how we would leverage it. Like, you start hearing some of this feedback, and then I'm always like, man, I did that. I vomited on these people, and they did not appreciate it.
Nope.
But so yeah, I think that it's important to get people what it is you're selling in bite-sized pieces that they're going to not only be able to ingest and digest, but really enjoy.
Right.
And then you can back into the what at the end.
No, I think that's definitely something that depending on your product, obviously, if you have a very simple product like, hey, listen, we can, you know, I can lower your rates, or I can, bring you all onto one single platform. There's obviously all these soft savings, but like depending on how complex your product is, it makes it extremely easy to do what you just discussed. And so that's where I struggle. And I think I'm so glad that FreightWaves as a company has given us tools like Gong, where where I don't have to maybe focus on like, okay, did I ask enough questions? It could be like, what was my talk time? And we start talking, scaling that approach and saying, okay, well, how interactive was the other person? Okay, well, how much did they talk? And so if you can break it down from there, and then if you are trying to scale this, and we talked about scale a little bit earlier, I think that's a really good way to just have that in the back of your mind of like, how much am I asking and talking versus how much are they talking, which is always a good way to see how interactive they are.
100%, right? And ask questions. You want it to be a two-way street.
Right.
You want to build trust so that you are uncovering the reality of what your product's going to do with them, because you have the insight on what your product can do and what you can do, and they have the insight of what they need and where they're at as a company
And
and
they
what
may
you're
not
trying
know what
to.
they need.
They may not, but the conversation wants to bring that up to the surface, right? And you may need to ask questions that brings that up to this. They might have pain points that they're not aware of. They might, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
But you might see things, but instead of just saying, "Hey, you have this problem," and then they're gonna say, "What are you talking about? Like, we're doing great. I got a raise last month. I don't know what you're talking about. We're wonderful as a company." They don't want to hear that. So you need to ask questions that say, can you improve? Or have you thought about this? Or have you looked into, you need to lead them into discovering areas of improvement, how your product might be able to help, as opposed to just charging in and saying like, you suck and I can make you better. Like that's
That works all the time, Richie. I don't know what you're talking about. Sign here, right?
exactly.
Wow. No, that's awesome. Well, perfect. So what do you've got a really good approach. You have a really good headspace. How can you improve? What are areas that you think that, you've gotten to where you are now, but how do you take it to the next level?
Look, I'm decent at thinking through these things and talking about it, but like you said earlier, like putting it into practice is something that's more difficult. And that's something that I'm always looking to get better at. And um, Cynic's most recent book, The Infinite Game, I thought was really good because he talks about games that you can't win, like being healthy. At which point you wake up and you're like, I've achieved healthiness, don't need to work on that anymore. Like
Check.
yeah, as opposed to someone who like runs out and does an Ironman, which is wonderful. Not knocking on Ironmans, but you get done with an Ironman and you're like, I've finished that. I'm gonna go eat 3 double cheeseburgers and drink like 5 beers, and I might do that every day for the next 3 months because I did an Ironman, right? And then
I
you
might
have this
sleep for 3
big,
days.
yeah, you just have this big spike of like good activities, bad activities, and it's not real sustainable. It's not consistent in building momentum. So in the same way of thinking about being healthy and how can you keep good habits and then keep refining and then keep you know being harsh on my opinions. Like I have all these opinions that I've shared with you today. I'm going to continue to edit those and filter those and try to be harder on them and try to tease out what part of that might not age well and what are the good things that I can hold on to. And just constantly learning and constantly picking people's brains and reading books and being open to the idea that I don't have it figured all out, and there's always something to learn, and there's always a way to improve and grow and keep going forward.
Yeah. No, I think you said it perfect. I don't think I could repurpose that and put it out any better. So, but Richie, thank you so much for joining me. I think this is, I've learned a lot here just by talking with you, and you've really pushed me this past year to be the number 3 man. But I'm really excited for 2021. I think this kind of messaging and this, reinstilling these thoughts are what, at least from what I feel, 2021 is really going to be focused on. I think there was so much stuff that happened in 2020 where people are just like, let's just try to get better in 2021. And so
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to be part of the team and learn from you as well. And I think that with what we're selling and what it can do to the industry and the services that we can provide and what, especially for the smaller mid-sized companies and how we can really empower them, and how we can just grow the health of the entire industry with the products that we're selling. It's really exciting to be a part of the team, and looking forward to seeing what happens in 2021.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.